Back-to-school savings are officially in session at Tanger Outlets. Shop tax-free August 2nd through 6th and save up to 70% off the latest school styles. The best of apparel, footwear, accessories, and more. Save at Nike Factory Store, American Eagle, Gap Outlet, Crocs, Under Armour, Banana Republic Factory, and hundreds more. There's always something happening. Discover the latest fun and events all season long. Tanger Outlets, your savings destination.
Judge Jeanine Pirro.
She's the outspoken host. Judge Jeanine Pirro is dominating the headlines right now.
This is the Judge Jeanine Tunnel to Towers Foundation Sunday morning show. Now, here's Judge Jeanine Pirro. Republican National Convention Week in Review. Highlights from the RNC with interviews from the convention's biggest names.
Red Apple Audio Network was there in Milwaukee for the RNC. This is our recap show as we give you a chance to hear some of the best interviews of the week. A look back at what was a very unified and patriotic convention for the GOP. And I'm your host, James Flippin of Red Apple Audio. In many ways, it's nothing short of wild to consider the fact the convention was bracketed by two of the biggest news stories of the year. In the case of last weekend, it was the near-death experience for former President Trump when a would-be assassin fired a bullet that grazed Trump's right ear, drawing blood, sending him to the ground, and then him rising up, pumping his fist in defiance, telling the crowd to fight. And then, as so many convention attendees and delegates, elected officials, and members of the media were looking to get out of Wisconsin on Friday after the convention had come to a close, a global IT outage struck, said to be one of, if not the biggest such IT outages in history. So what we've got for you here are some select interviews. We don't have enough time to play all of them, but you can go to redapplepodcastnetwork.com. That's redapplepodcastnetwork.com to check out everything from Milwaukee, and we encourage you to do so. Today, we'll touch on former President Trump's acceptance speech at the convention, in which he formally accepted the Republicans' nomination for president. And for Trump and the GOP, it's an attempt to elect the nation's 45th president to serve as its 47th president. It would be the only time a U.S. president served two non-consecutive terms since New Jersey resident and one-time governor of New York, Grover Cleveland, pulled it off in the late 1800s. So let's start off by touching on what was easily the biggest headline of the convention and the thing people were most talking about, the attempted assassination of former President Trump. Sid Rosenberg, host of Sid and Friends in the Morning, spoke to Detroit pastor Lorenzo Sewell, who was one of the convention's speakers.
My name is Pastor Lorenzo Sewell. I have the honor and the privilege of being the senior pastor at 180 Church, and we were blessed last month to have President Donald Trump come to Detroit, Michigan.
Back here on Radio Row, the RNC 2024. Sitting to my left right now, he is Pastor Zoe out of the great city of Detroit, Michigan. And you are not only here in Milwaukee, Mr. Zoe, but you're going to speak the same night that Trump speaks. How the hell did you manage that?
Now, that's a miracle, right? I was born and raised on the east side of Detroit, mentored by murderers, student of the streets. My dad is in prison for murder today. Yeah.
For murder?
Yep.
Wow. How old are you and your dad went to prison?
I was 12 years old.
See, I've been to Detroit many times. I did sports for 16 years. And I was a very famous sports broadcaster. Now I do politics. I went to a Super Bowl in Detroit, of all places. And it's a rough city.
Absolutely.
So when you say you've been through this and seen all this, it makes sense to me. So your dad's in prison for murder, and you were mentored by a bunch of murderers.
Yes.
And then how can you explain this handsome, educated young man sitting next to me at a Republican convention?
Well, I'm telling you this, it was Jesus, right? I had a radical encounter with Jesus Christ, and last month I was able to pray for President Donald Trump. He came to the hood. Can you imagine that?
He came to Detroit?
Not just Detroit, the hood, right? You got the hood, and they got the hood in the hood, right?
Did he come there specifically to see you?
He came to our church to listen to the longings and the aspirations of our community. Unlike other political parties that come and tell us what we ought to do, he actually learned how to listen.
This is so great. I'll tell you why. First of all, you fall into that category, which is real people, right? You've been through some real hardships. And clearly, through the help of God, and I got to give you some credit too, you fought your way out of it. But you're a black man too, right? And all you hear about is from the John Legends of the world and all these famous black people how Trump's a racist. I know this. When Trump was president, I'm talking about economics, okay?
Sure.
Black people did better than ever in the history of this country. Same thing with Latinos. And I know, anecdotally, a lot of black people that love Donald Trump. You're one of those guys.
Yeah, and it's very interesting when you play identity politics, right? When you try to use virtue signaling to be able to say what one person feels. But what I know is that President Obama, he never came to my hood, right? President Biden, he never came to my hood, but President Trump desired to come to a place. Not only did he listen, but he gave us a plan to make black America great again.
How long have you been a fan of President Trump?
Well, since he was willing to be a developer, right? Look what he did in New York.
Yes.
Right?
So since you're a kid, you've always appreciated Donald Trump. Because I
Absolutely.
can't imagine you come from a Republican family, Pastor.
Sure.
So your family has to be Democrats.
Well, you know what? Interestingly enough, my family actually pointed me toward the Bible. And being a man who studied the Word of God, I understand that in a black woman's womb is the most dangerous place for a black person.
Now, why is that?
Well, because of abortion, right? When we look at what took place with Margaret Sanger, when we look what took place with the eugenics movement, we see that her mindset was black people weren't real people. So 19 million, can you imagine that? Children have been aborted in a black woman's womb.
Wow. I'm pro-choice. I love Donald Trump. He loves me. And I am a Republican, but I am pro-choice.
Sure.
To a certain extent. Some of these wacky Democrats want to kill the baby when the baby's 9 months is already a human being. But getting back to prayer and Donald Trump, you told me something right before this conversation. I nearly fell to the floor. When he saw you in Detroit a couple of weeks ago, when you met him, you talked about prayer, and you talked about keeping him safe, keeping him alive and safe. That is unbelievable when you consider what happened, Pastor Zoe, just 4 days ago.
We prayed over him, and when we prayed over him, remember, this was impromptu. This wasn't scripted. Right? When we were at the round table, he said, "Can you pray for me?" And the first thing I prayed for him was protection. And can you imagine last Saturday, a bullet almost assassinating our president as a black man, right? I think about leaders that stand up for the black community. I think about JFK. I think about MLK, right? I think about Malcolm X from the extreme part of it. But when I think about the political part, I think about Reagan, right? I think about how our president now is in a category all of itself, that the good Lord sent angels around him to protect him so that he can make America great again.
Were you actually thinking for a while now that something bad could happen to Trump? And did he express to you at all that he was concerned about that, or was just this is like literally off the handle?
I think you can actually sense it, right? You can sense when somebody is not a typical politician, when someone's actually going against what we would call a political pundit, and someone who actually has his own thing, has his own ideas. We know that in our history from Lincoln, right? We see that people often try to assassinate, but we know that the Bible teaches that no weapon formed against us will prosper. So we're praying for him. We have courage. We fear not, and we're believing that he will be the 47th president of the United States of America.
God bless you. And it is pretty amazing that you had that prayer session talking about protection, and maybe it was just that saved his life. Good for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's my man, Pastor Zoe, sitting friends in the morning.
Now, it's time for Protecting Your Investments, sponsored by Colonial Metals Group.
And back here on our recap show, in which we're playing back some of our favorite interviews from the RNC in Milwaukee. We're also going to hear from a congressman out of Pennsylvania who was there that day at the rally when former President Trump was nearly killed by an assassin's bullet. Stay with us here on the Red Apple Audio Network. I'm James Flippin.
It's the Judge Jeanine Show.
Back-to-school savings are officially in session at Tanger Outlets. Shop tax-free August 2nd through 6th and save up to 70% off the latest school styles. The best of apparel, footwear, accessories, and more. Save at Nike Factory Store, American Eagle, Gap Outlet, Crocs, Under Armour, Banana Republic Factory, and hundreds more. There's always something happening. Discover the latest fun and events all season long. Tanger Outlets, your savings destination. Back-to-school savings are officially in session at Tanger Outlets. Shop tax-free August 2nd through 6th and save up to 70% off the latest school styles. The best of apparel, footwear, accessories, and more. Save at Nike Factory Store, American Eagle, Gap Outlet, Crocs, Under Armour, Banana Republic Factory, and hundreds more. There's always something happening. Discover the latest fun and events all season long. Tanger Outlets, your savings destination.
This is the Jeanine Pirro Show. Now, here's Judge Jeanine Pirro. Republican National Convention Week in Review.
James Flippin here on our RNC recap show. Red Apple Audio Network was broadcasting live from Radio Row in Milwaukee all week, and we're sharing with you some of our favorite interviews. We just heard from the pastor who prayed over Trump during a visit to Detroit ahead of the narrowly avoided assassination attempt in Pennsylvania that some have referred to as divine intervention. Congressman Dan Musner, the rep for Pennsylvania's 9th District, was at that rally, and Red Apple Audio Network host Dominic Carter spoke to him about that.
You literally, Congressman, just came out from a briefing with the Secret Service Director and the FBI. What can you tell us as of this point?
Yeah, we just were hearing from on a congressional call, which I can disclose some of the information with Director Wray and as well as Director Cheadle, who's heads up the Secret Service. They were going through the timeline as to what occurred, much of which I think I knew and most of us knew, and then they were going into what investigations and what they found out thus far. Cheadle mentioned that there was clearly a lapse in security and truly a failure to fully and properly protect the former president. So she admitted that. They have a zero-fail mission, as you'd imagine, and that was not what their result was, as we well know. And they're looking forward to cooperating with Congress and being very transparent to the American people. In fact, that's I'm quoting. That's what she said. The attack was classified as an assassination. Joe Biden recently had trouble maybe stating that it was an assassination, but they've officially classified it as an attempted assassination. And Director Wray also went on to say of some of the what they were doing regarding searching the shooter's cell phones, his home. Performed over 200 interviews. They found explosives in his automobile, which they don't think were live, could explode, and the fact that he bought ammo just a couple of days after the president announced he was going to be at the rally. Quite a bit of ammo.
So Congressman Musner, it is confirmed that the suspect had explosives in the vehicle and in the home?
I don't know about the home, but I do know in the automobile, right? And they also stated that they, at this point in time, have no evidence at all that there were others involved. There's no evidence indicating others were involved.
So this was a lone individual who was sick mentally, based on what the Secret Service Director just told you and other members of Congress and the FBI Director.
Right.
Now, you joined me, and I was so thankful for it, for my earlier program. You were at the actual rally when this happened. Yep. Take me through that one more time, please, Congressman.
Well, sure. Like I had mentioned, it really began as a typical rally. We did our pre-rally speeches, myself, Senate candidate Dave McCormick, Representative Mike Kelly.
Wait a minute, Congressman. So before Mr. Trump spoke, right, you were actually on the same stage that he would later take?
Yes.
which means that if the sniper decided to fire early, you and every speaker could have been a potential target.
Well, I guess so. You could. That is the case. When the president came out, he was great. I mean, we saw him beforehand, spent a couple of minutes with him. He does pictures and all. He was in great spirits. He jokes around. He's just a good person to be around. And then he comes out after about 7 minutes of speaking. And it's interesting, Dominic. I don't know about interesting, but well, you take it for what it is. He gestured to Dave McCormick. Hey, we got Dave McCormick here. Dave's the best. Going to be a great U.S. Senator. Dave, why don't you come up on the stage? And then he stopped Dave. He said, you know what, let's have you up a little bit later. And no more than 60 seconds later is when the firing began. And again, as we now all know, who've been paying any attention to it, fortunately, the president turned his head to look at the images that he was showing of a graph of the massive level of illegal immigration that has taken place under Biden versus when he was in office. And the president just turned his head to look at it just as the third shot whizzed by his head and hit his ear, as we now know, within a quarter inch or less, 2 centimeters, of taking the former president, likely the future president's life. So that's how close all of this was. And as I mentioned, very tragically, we lost a wonderful Pennsylvanian by the name of Corey Companatori, who lives out in the western side of the state. His daughter and his wife was there, and Corey gave his life protecting, hovering over, shielding his daughter and his wife. And very, very sadly, he was hitting the head. And I will tell you this, he was no more than, if he was 20 feet behind us, that was a lot. But he was raised. He was about 6 feet up in the bleachers. So, Congressman, does it surprise you that it has been announced Mr. Trump is going to go to the former firefighter's funeral? Doesn't surprise me at all. That's who the president is. He could probably go and raise $1 million somewhere or something else in that time frame. That's a good point. Yeah, but instead, President Trump knows what's important. The people are important. A gentleman who's attending his rally that lost his life to come there and support him. The president's going to be there to support him. Congressman, I'm only going to take a minute or two more of your time, but because we really do appreciate you leaving this FBI briefing. I know you got to get back in other things and so on. But day 3 is now over of the RNC. How do you feel the convention is going thus far? What has stood out to you, Congressman Musa? Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, Dominic, just this whole uniting theme of ours, yes, and our platform that we all have gotten behind. And a big tent, not just traditional voters, but reaching out to blacks, to Latinos, to union members. Go ahead, Congressman Musa. You're saying it right. Moms, people with sorrowful stories of loss of children due to the fentanyl epidemic, and as well as just fabulous stories of how well people were doing economically under the Trump administration versus today. So it's really, and as you said, a big tent. It's not just about uniting our party. It's about trying to unite America. Congressman Dan Musa of the 9th District of Pennsylvania, you are remarkable. It scares me that you were at the rally yourself. What could have happened to you? The impact on your family, the fact that you had to witness all of this up close, Congressman. And I just wish you well. I really do. Thank you so much for joining us. You're a good man, Dominic. Thanks very much.
So much still to come here on Red Apple Audio Network as we recap the RNC in Milwaukee and our coverage of that event from Radio Row. We've been talking a lot about the attempted assassination of former President Trump a week ago in Pennsylvania. But the convention, of course, was also a celebration of sorts, a coming together for the GOP as they look ahead to the election in November. And, of course, everyone's unified at this point behind former President Trump and his candidacy, as well as his running mate, J.D. Vance, the Ohio senator. And we're going to hear later this hour from a man who could have been named as the VP nominee, Florida Senator Marco Rubio, also a man who was a candidate in this race earlier, Larry Elder out of California, and former candidate for governor in New York, Lee Zeldin. This is Red Apple Audio Network's recap of the RNC in Milwaukee.
Drive into summer with the Honda CR-V and Accord, your fun-to-drive weekend getaway vehicles. From Honda, the 2024 Kelley Blue Book's KBB.com Best Value brand. So hurry in to the Honda Summer Event. For a limited time, well-qualified buyers can get a 2.9% APR on a 2025 CR-V or 2024 Accord.
See dealer for financing details based on 2024 Consumer Choice Awards from Kelley Blue Book. Visit kbb.com for more information.
This is the Jeanine Pirro Show. Now, here's Judge Jeanine Pirro. Republican National Convention Week in Review.
Welcome back to our RNC recap here on Red Apple Audio Network. I'm your host, James Flippin. And in the wake of the assassination attempt against former President Trump last weekend, so many at the convention were looking back on what could have been and the tragedy we were able to narrowly avoid as a nation. But looking even further back, radio host Larry Elder of California was himself a candidate for president early during the primary season. And he joined Red Apple audio host Dominic Carter from Radio Row.
Joining us right now is someone that's no stranger to the nation. He's been a candidate himself, was initially so in this race, and that is Larry Elder. So nice to see you, and welcome here to the convention in Milwaukee.
Dom, thank you for having me. I'm amazed you can read this. Look at this. Look at this. You see this?
My chicken scratch.
What is that?
My chicken scratch.
Morse code? What is this?
My chicken scratch.
Goodness.
So let's start. We're at the RNC, but let's start with President Biden, okay?
Yes.
Lots of speculation, heavy Democrats pushing him to get out. How do you see this playing out, Larry Elder?
Dom, President Biden is dead man walking. When you've got Nancy Pelosi coming out and saying he should go, Chuck Schumer coming out and saying he should go, Axelrod, who was one of Obama's top aides, which tells you that Obama is pulling the strings behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
They've never really liked each other. There's a book called Game Change, came out in 2000. After the 2008 campaign, in which Obama is quoted as saying, how many more times is Joe Biden going to say something stupid? Obama tried to talk him out of running in 2016. He was successful in doing that. He tried to talk him out of running in 2020. He was unsuccessful. There's no love lost between the two of them. Biden's frailties are there for all people to see. I don't know who that genius is, Dom, who said that Biden needs to get out more in unscripted settings. Every time he does, he says something stupid, like saying he's the first black vice president, female president.
Or pushing for an early debate that essentially ended your campaign.
Yeah. And he goes on BET and repeats that same lie that he was involved in the civil rights movement when there's no evidence whatsoever of that. Even the LA Times, Jake Tapper, quoting the New York Times, said there's no evidence that Biden desegregated movie theaters and restaurants in Wilmington, that he did any of that stuff. And the biggest lie, though, Dom, I want to talk about is a lie that launched his candidacy in 2020, which is that Donald Trump, talking about Charlottesville, said there were good Nazis and bad Nazis on both sides. He said no such thing. He even said during that press conference, and I'm not talking about the white nationalists and the neo-Nazis because they should be condemned totally. That's verbatim. He was talking about the debate on whether or not there should be a Confederate monument in the public square. Even Jake Tapper, 2 years after the fact, said that, and Snopes, 7 years after the fact, said that. So that whole lie is the entire basis of Joe Biden's campaign, and virtually nobody pushes back when he says it, and he still says it.
Fair enough. What do you, Larry Elder, expect to hear from Mr. Trump tonight? Obviously, he must say something about the assassination attempt.
Yeah. Because of that, I fortunately never have had a close call like that. Although I must tell you, Don, when I ran for governor, an egg was thrown at me. And while because they said Larry Elder deserved it, the sheriff of L.A. County said that the LAPD should take it more seriously, and he called it a hate crime. Also, my campaign was shot at 45 minutes before this happened, not with bullets, but with pellets. And one of them went through a folder one of my guys was holding. It could have gone through his eye. So a near miss like that changes you, makes you more reflective, makes you more compassionate. So I think Donald Trump is going to tone it down a little bit. The fire and brimstone that he normally does, we won't see that tonight. It'll be a much more reflective, can we come together type speech, which is what I anticipate.
I haven't heard him speak. I've known him a long time since this happened, but he seems somewhat subdued, yes, somewhat toned down. Yes. So Larry Elder, I want you're a straight shooter. You call it the way you see it. What do you make of this entire assassination attempt, and how much did the Secret Service drop the ball?
Well, the Secret Service head should be fired. She was confronted on the floor yesterday and ran from all these senators who wanted questions. Obviously, nobody should have been on that building with that sight line to Trump. And apparently, several people tried to alert the police that there was somebody on there crawling up that building with a gun, and nothing was done. So there are all sorts of problems that I can see. There'll be an after-action investigation, and I think a lot of heads need to roll. But what I think happened is, because he survived it, it reminds me of George Washington. General Washington had his horse shot out from under him, had a bullet go through his hat, had a bullet go through his uniform. He was never struck. And so the troops felt that there was kind of a shroud of protection by God around him. And that's how a lot of people in this arena feel. Republicans are more religious than Democrats and independents. And so there's a real feeling in the building that Donald Trump was protected by God. I'm a big NFL fan. The greatest NFL catch was the Immaculate Reception. I call this the Immaculate Protection.
Interesting. So you're referring to Franco Harris. I'll close with this. I believe that the Democrats are done no matter what. And if you put Kamala Harris up top, that's like got to be the biggest joke in America. How do you see it?
Well, I think that we, meaning Republicans, should be careful about underestimating Kamala Harris and underestimating the media's ability to resurrect her. Because when the media is done with her, assuming she's a nominee, and I believe she will be the nominee, they will construct her into a combination of Joan of Arc and Rosa Parks. And keep in mind this, too. She's never lost an election when she's been on the ballot. She dropped out of 2020 before she got any contest, but she won DA twice in the Bay Area. She won as AG twice in California. She won as U.S. Senator in California, and she won on the ballot with Joe Biden. And she tried to become president. She wants to be president. She's never lost an election when she's been on the ballot. So don't underestimate her. But more importantly, please don't underestimate the ability of the media to create this icon now, a person of color who's been ridiculed because of her so-called cackle.
They're doing an Obama with her?
It's sexist and it's racist, yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Larry Elder,
and one more thing. Inevitably, Trump is going to give her some sort of nickname. You know that. We don't know what it's going to be yet. Whatever it is.
Give me an idea. What do you think it'll be?
I heard something about her being cackling something or other.
Right, giggles.
But Dom, it doesn't matter. Whatever it is, whatever nickname you get her, however gentle it is, however he expresses it, the media will accuse him of being A, sexist, and B, racist.
Well, you know that's coming. Both of them.
Oh, yeah.
Sexist and racist.
Yes.
But I agree with you, Larry Elder. He's going to be a bit more subdued tonight and in the general election, and nothing will stop him from going back to the White House. The will of the people was on his side.
Right.
Larry Elder, you are a great American, and thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Dom. Thank you for having me.
Such a great guy, Larry. Was awesome to connect with him there at the RNC. Turning now to one of our other hosts on the Red Apple Audio Network, Rita Cosby, who co-hosts Katz and Cosby alongside owner-operator John Catsimatidis, in addition to her own program here on Red Apple Audio. She caught up with Florida Senator Marco Rubio, who had been on the short list for potential choices as Trump's VP.
Joining us here on Katz and Cosby as we are at the Republican National Convention here in Milwaukee is none other than the great Florida Senator Marco Rubio. Senator Rubio, great to have you here on the show. Talk about just how important this night is tonight. And just a matter of hours from now, we're going to hear from the former President of the United States, very likely the future one based on the polls. This is a powerful moment for not just the Republican Party, but for America.
Well, first of all, it's always fun to talk to future Floridians on the broadcast. So
we're looking at coming there, believe me.
I know. Well, we'll get our fair share for sure. But it's been a great convention. I've been to 5 conventions, beginning in '96 when I was a volunteer working at the convention. And this is by far the best one. The most unified party, the most enthusiastic party. The most confident party, and I think that's going to bode well. I mean, look, I think every party will tell you they feel great coming out of their conventions, but this is probably the best political convention Republicans have had since 1984, and I think that probably the best Democratic convention they had was in 2008 with Obama. You know, that one. This one's probably better than that one in my view. But nonetheless, I mean, I think we have a lot to feel good about. But look, there's still 100-something days left in this election. Frankly, at this moment, we don't know who President Trump's opponent is going to be, but I don't really think it matters. In the end, I don't think people are going to be voting for Trump because a Biden or a Kamala Harris. I think they're going to vote for him because he's the only one running that's made them a priority, people a priority, not ideology, but them, the people. And I think that makes him a unique candidate in the modern political history of our country. And it's the reason why I think he's going to be our president again. What could be a pretty big victory if things play out. Well,
and speaking of which, so much so that former President Obama came out and has been quoted left and right saying that he's trying to push President Biden out. We've heard reports from everywhere. You just brought up it's what a juxtaposition from the unification and the energy here, and it seems like the Democrats are in complete disarray.
Well, and also they're hypocrites, right? Because they talk about how they're the defenders of democracy, but you have 14 million Democrats voted for Biden in a primary, and then here come 8 to 10 of their in-party elders, self-appointed party elders, and they come in and basically decide we're going to push our nominee out of the way. I mean, that doesn't sound very democratic to me. That sounds, kind of Soviet. So I would just tell you that that's their problem to figure out. But they are the ones that covered this up. They knew what Biden's condition was, and they covered it up until they couldn't cover it up anymore. They covered it up by lying. And I would say if you're going to remove him as a candidate, you got to remove him as president, because candidate is the easy part. President is the hard part. How can he continue as president? So, they got a lot to answer for.
You're on so many key committees, and you talk about that. There's such huge security issues happening in the world right now. We look at what's happening, of course, in the Middle East. We look at Ukraine, and we look at our wide open southern border, which I know, Senator Rubio, you understand all too well. How important is it to have a commander-in-chief who really has his finger on the pulse? And all I think about is if President Trump comes in, he's got a lot to clean up.
Let me tell you a story, because I was kind of tangentially around this when it happened. President Trump warned the Iranians that no American should die, and they didn't listen. They tested him, and an American contractor died in a missile attack by one of their proxy groups in Iraq. They then tried to storm our embassy. They tried to do a Benghazi in Baghdad, and he said that wasn't going to happen. He surged forces and blew that back. And then he said, all right, 48 hours later, Soleimani was dead, and they were all shocked, because Soleimani's an untouchable guy. Soleimani was such an arrogant guy that he flew into Baghdad in a commercial flight, jumped in a car that some guy just picked him up off the curb, no security detail. He had no fear, and then he was gone. The Iranians calmed down a lot after that happened, a lot. They really calmed down. Like, we didn't have the problems we had with them after that point. And, they did some symbolic thing, and they messaged very clearly, this is going to be symbolic. We don't want this to escalate, and it was over. I get it. I wish we lived in a world where people could have a meeting at the UN and work this out, but there are parts of this world where the people you're dealing with only understand strength. They respect strength. They may hate your guts, but they understand strength, and they are encouraged and emboldened by weakness. And right now, we appear weak. We just do. People view Biden as weak. Our enemies view him as weak. And that's why Putin starts an invasion. That's why the Taliban humiliated us. That's why China is intimidating the Philippines and Taiwan aggressively every single day. That's why I'm convinced what happened on October 7th happens, and what could happen now with Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is even far more dangerous. So it is what the real dangers in the world are dealt with through a position of strength, not weakness. And I think Trump always kind of instinctively understood that in a way that sometimes people like Joe Biden, both because of the condition he's in and because of the people he's surrounded by, don't get. And it's put our country in great harm, and it's done tremendous damage to our global reputation.
Absolutely. Well, Senator Marco Rubio, thank you so much for being here. It's an honor to see you here at the Republican National Convention. Thank you.
Thank you. Great doing this with you.
Senator Marco Rubio of Florida chatting there with our own Rita Cosby. When we come back, we're going to chat with a guy who once ran for governor of New York, also was a member of Congress, and is a guy who knows former President Trump very well. In fact, he gave a speech at the RNC this past week and was spotted sitting right alongside Trump on that day. This is Red Apple Audio Network's recap of our live broadcast from the RNC in Milwaukee, and I'm your host, James Flippin.
This is the Judge Jeanine Show. This is the Jeanine Pirro Show. Now, here's Judge Jeanine Pirro. Republican National Convention Week in Review. Highlights from the RNC with interviews from the convention's biggest names.
This past week, Red Apple Audio Network broadcast live from the RNC in Milwaukee, and during that event, I had a chance to ask former candidate for governor in New York, Lee Zeldin, what makes former President Trump such a fighter, part of an interview on the Dominic Carter Show.
One of the lines you had during your speech at the RNC was very poignant because you said, look, former President Trump is the only president in certainly most of our lifetime that hasn't started a foreign war. Why is it so important to remind the American people about that?
The cost of war, the cost of treasure, and by treasure, it's not just financial. I mean, my life is basically split in half pre 9/11 and post 9/11. I signed up for the Army before 9/11. I went on active duty right after 9/11, after I finished up ROTC, and I have lost so many friends, both in combat and due to post-traumatic stress after returning home. We've seen thousands upon thousands of U.S. American courageous heroes lose limbs. The sacrifice that we have witnessed when you engage in a foreign conflict, it is a decision to send our nation's sons and daughters into harm's way and potentially risk their life. I believe that too often we send our troops into harm's way without a plan to win. I believe you should never send our troops into harm's way unless there is a strategy to win, that when they come home, we treat our service members, our veterans, with love, dignity, and respect. We need to understand that we treat our friends as friends and our adversaries as adversaries, that we ensure that the military option is on the table not because we want war, but because we want to prevent it. You know, at this moment in time, when we look forward of what kind of commander-in-chief we have, what kind of president of the United States we have, I want a president who is pursuing peace through strength. I want a president who is committed towards stopping conflict, not starting conflict. President Trump, day in, day out, showed that commitment. God bless him for it. For 4 more years, I want more of it.
That's Lee Zeldin. We're here on the Dominic Carter Show. And Lee, I'm going to take you back to that opening day of the RNC when former President Trump walked out on stage, that iconic moment, and he had the big bandage on that ear that was wounded. But a lot of people noticed his face as well, how much emotion there seemed to be in his face. What did you see in that moment?
Same. I mean, he came as close to death as you can get. I mean, we're not talking about a bullet that was fired 30 feet away. We're not talking about a bullet that was a foot away from an arm. We're talking about a bullet that was an inch away from his skull. And it was through the grace of God. Thank God his head at the last possible second ends up moving just a bit, so that bullet ends up only piercing his ear. President Trump, I thought, had already been through everything you could possibly throw at him, and there was an assassin who woke up that day on Saturday committed to throwing something far worse than anything else President Trump has had to face combined.
So, Lee, you know the guy so well. You've talked about his fight. You've talked about how much that's inspiring to you and so many other Americans. A lot of different things kind of enter my mind. His faith, his upbringing, love of country. But what is it that makes former President Trump such a warrior? How does he do it? What is it?
I think that he was a fighter before he entered the political arena. And I think that the fight that his political adversaries have brought to him have only made him stronger, have only made him more of a warrior, more of a fighter, more sharp. So I think that every single time that some type of negative energy was brought to him, not only did he deflect it, but any power that was coming towards him, he tried to channel into more motivation to fight harder the next day. So, God bless him for channeling all of this negativity the right way, in order to still be standing strong on his feet, despite everything else, doing his part to want to make this country great again.
That Lee Zeldin, a former military guy himself, talking about foreign policy, what he sees in Trump, and the emotions surrounding last weekend's assassination attempt. From a first-hand perspective, I can tell you there was a lot of emotion on display throughout the week, passion and patriotism from some of the delegates and other attendees, resolve and fight from former President Trump despite being wounded, and an overwhelming sense of party unity and loyalty behind the candidate ahead of November. But perhaps no moment was more touching than when Trump, during his final acceptance speech, observed a moment of silence for Fire Chief Corey Comparator, who was killed by Trump's would-be assassin on that field in Pennsylvania.
There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for others. This is the spirit that forged America in her darkest hours, and this is the love that will lead America back to the summit of human achievement and greatness. This is what we need. Despite such a heinous attack, we unite this evening more determined than ever. I am more determined than ever, and so are you. So is everybody in this room.
That'll do it for our RNC recap here on Red Apple Audio Networks, but there's so many more interviews that we conducted from Milwaukee. You can check those all out at redapplepodcastnetwork.com. We encourage you to do so. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, James Flippin.
Back to school savings are officially in session at Tanger Outlets. Shop tax-free August 2nd through 6th and save up to 70% off the latest school styles. The best of apparel, footwear, accessories, and more. Save at Nike Factory Store, American Eagle, Gap Outlet, Crocs, Under Armour, Banana Republic Factory, and hundreds more. There's always something happening. Discover the latest fun and events all season long. Tanger Outlets, your savings destination.